It's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, the feminist campaigner Caroline Criado Perez, the Mail on Sundays, Peter Hitchens, Emma Barr from the centre-right think tank, the Centre for Policy Studies, and the journalist Steve Richards. The cross-party Brexit talks have collapsed without agreement.
These talks have now reached what I believe to be a natural conclusion.
Theresa May has agreed to set a timetable for her departure from Downing Street. So who wants the top job?
Do you think you're too divisive to be Tory Prime Minister?
He said yesterday he's going for it. But what about the others?
Do you want the top job, Mr. Gove?
Hello, good morning. I think the most important thing that we all need to do is to focus on the fact that the government are bringing forward the withdrawal agreement bill, which will enable us to leave the European Union.
Should the police be allowed to take your picture as you walk down the street?
I've got a now £90 fine. There you go. Look at that. Thanks, lads.
But let's start with something else. David Cameron, former Prime Minister, has announced, or it's been said, that his book is finally coming out in the autumn, we think in mid-September. There it is, David Cameron, For the Record. My question to you all is, starting with Caroline, are you going to read it?
No.
Why not?
I'm just not really very interested in what David Cameron has to say, unless it's just an apology for ruining the country. But it's not going to be. It's For the Record. It's his defence of why what he did wasn't a terrible idea and he, didn't completely destroy everything and then walk off whistling. I'm not interested. And also, everything's moved on so far since he left that, what can he possibly have to say of interest?
Peter, what about you? And just we'll show our viewers the picture of David Cameron in his shepherd's hut where the great work was supposed to have been completed.
Yes, well, I shall, of course, look in the index to see if I'm mentioned.
Of course, every good journalist does that, don't they? Quick, am I in
After
there?
that, I'll flip through to see if there are any other revelations or non-revelations about things that I know about. But actually, political memoirs, especially ones written at such speed, are usually pretty worthless and reveal almost nothing. So, no, I think the chances of me carrying it about for weeks, reading it page by page, are very slender.
Emma, what about you? In terms of David Cameron's legacy and maybe the reasons for why he called the EU referendum in the first place in 2016, is there enough there that you will be compelled to read?
Yeah, that's pretty much the only bit I will be reading, because I'd like to see his reasons for why he put us in this situation. And I also think there'll be quite a lot of potential leadership candidates who'll be interested in how an outside candidate came in and became party leader. So I think he might have a bit more interest from MPs who are gunning for the top job than perhaps anyone on this panel.
Steve, what about you? You did a documentary, a series of radio documentaries on the Cameron years, in fact. What will you be looking for in this book?
Well, I've got a book out on modern prime ministers in September, and there's a chapter on David Cameron, which will be more balanced and shorter than his book, so I recommend that. But I wonder whether he will say, and I doubt if he will, that I got the job far too young when I was a half-formed politician. I'd been Shadow Education Secretary for about 10 days. That wasn't enough for the titanic tasks of leadership, and my strategy of copying Tony Blair in reverse was a shallow one. I doubt if we will hear that, but I think that is the context from which all followed. The bar for leadership now is very low, and he wasn't ready, and it showed in all kinds of manifestations subsequently. But I suspect that won't be the essence of his book.
Surely he was copying Tony Blair full stop, not in reverse. There was no reverse about it, and that's what he sought to do.
Well, I think there was a reverse in the sense that at the beginning, where they saw their weaknesses on being the so-called nasty party, he tried to be different. But by the time of the financial crash, he became Thatcherite in economic policy. I know he didn't in the social areas that worry you, Peter, but he did economically switch back. And that was one of the sort of weaknesses, I think, that he didn't even stick to the sort of Blairite in reverse strategy.
Will you read it, though?
Yes.
Right. Let's talk about the current Prime Minister for the moment, anyway, Theresa May, because we've heard from Labour, from Jeremy Corbyn, that the cross-party talks on Brexit are over. Let's hear from Theresa May.
We haven't been able to overcome the fact that there isn't a common position in Labour about whether they want to deliver Brexit or hold a second referendum which could reverse it. Now, so when we come to bring the legislation forward, we will think carefully about what we've had with these talks, the outcome of these talks. We'll also consider whether we have some votes to see if the ideas that have come through command a majority in the House of Commons. But when MPs come to vote on the bill, they will be faced with a stark choice. That is, to vote to deliver on the referendum, to vote to deliver Brexit, or to shy away again from delivering Brexit with all the uncertainty that that would leave.
Theresa May there, still pushing the idea of the Brexit agreement bill, which is going to come to Parliament in a couple of weeks' time. Emma, are you surprised that the talks didn't reach an agreement?
Sadly not, no. I think that Labour seem to be so divided that it would be almost impossible to negotiate with a group of people who don't have a common position. So you have Keir Starmer advocating a second referendum when Jeremy Corbyn and his side of the party seem to have been more committed to the talks. I don't think there was really any chance from the beginning, but they did all have to try.
Steve?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think the talks are another example of the impossible obstacles that Brexit presents. Here are two groups of people theoretically aching to get some Brexit deal, but could never deliver. Theresa May, I'm told, at no point offered a customs union. There were sort of wordings around it. And at no point could Corbyn have delivered his parliamentary party to support a deal with the Conservatives. So, you know, you have a group of people who might every now and again say, oh, that's interesting, and that's interesting. They were doomed from the beginning.
Do you think it was a mistake to enter the talks, both of you, in the first place?
Oh, I think the problem has been from the moment the referendum was called that everybody in Parliament has, and both the political parties, have abdicated responsibility. And they have been offered many, many opportunities to come back into the decision-making process and to commit themselves to a compromise of some kind or another, and none of them have been prepared to do it. I think the attempt to have talks was a desperate measure. It was based on the idea that there was still something approaching proper parliamentary and party politics in this country, neither of which still exist. And what this demonstrates is that they have both gone. That neither the parties don't really speak for anybody anymore. They're desperately afraid of their own voters, and Parliament isn't prepared to take decisions. Which is why I think, and this is absolutely not wishful thinking in my case, that the end of this is going to have to be a second referendum because no one else is going to take responsibility. They're going to toss it back to the people who they gave it to in the first place, and who then gave them a problem they couldn't solve.
And actually, I think that Corbyn could have delivered his party if he had said, we will agree to this deal so long as there's a confirmatory referendum. So actually, if he had been prepared to say that, which shouldn't have been too difficult for him, given it's within their party policy.
In the talks, I mean, albeit sort of in a kind of reticent way, the referendum came up again and again. And the government side said that we can't accept it. So they are going round in circles. I think there is one tiny glimmer of hope for her. It's not her side. There's going to be a bigger revolt on her side. But there is a possibility, I think they would be mistaken in doing so, of a Labour revolt. There will clearly be a three-line whip against it from the Labour side. But I noticed people like Lucy Powell, who used to run a sort of pro-European campaign, saying, look, there's a real danger of no deal here, and so, and you can see just a circumstance where that might happen. I think it's highly unlikely, but that is the only hope she's got.
Can I just pick you up on the second referendum point,
yeah.
Labour's position? I don't think it is particularly clear. They've announced their official position, but Corbyn at no point has stood at the dispatch box and said, I'm in favour of a second referendum.
Well, he's not.
I agree, he's not. But that's where the difficulty comes, and I think that we do need to bear that in mind.
Right, well, let's talk about Theresa May's departure and the supposed timetable that she has set or is going to set. Let's talk to Caroline Wheeler from the Sunday Times. She joins us, one of the lobby journalists. Caroline, tell us exactly what has Theresa May agreed to?
So she met with the executive committee of the 1922 committee in what was described as quite an emotionally charged meeting yesterday, where she has agreed to set out her departure timetable after that withdrawal agreement has gone through Parliament the next time, which she's promising to do the week beginning June the 3rd, with many expecting that vote to be held on about the 5th of June. So it's after that vote on the 5th of June that we're then expecting there to be some movement and some significant development in terms of exactly when she's going to go.
Right, but there's not a precise date, is there, which is what many Tory backbenchers had hoped for and are still furious about in their minds, that they don't yet know when she will actually go, and it is still dependent on events.
Exactly. And there's some papers today reporting that she could be gone as soon as the 30th of June. But of course, it is all dependent on when that withdrawal agreement goes to the Commons. Now, they've said that that will be sort of early in June. But as we've seen today, with the breakdown of those talks with Labour, that does raise a really significant prospect of whether or not she'll actually bring that withdrawal agreement forward if she knows that she's facing another massive defeat. So the question mark as to when she will actually go remains just as unclear today as it did yesterday.
Caroline, thank you very much. Emma, are you sad, relieved that it looks as if Theresa May is in the endgame?
I wouldn't say either of those. I think it's more practical. I think we kind of seem to have a plan to make a plan at the moment, so I wouldn't say there's any relief with the next steps. But I think if there's progress towards some kind of resolution, which I think her leaving is probably the only way, then yes, I think that's a good step.
Right, and the leadership contest is well underway and has been for some time.
Is it towards a resolution? I mean, it's just going to be more of the same. The problem isn't, you know, who's the leader of the Tory party. The problem is that no one in Parliament can agree on what Brexit looks like. So changing leaders isn't going to change anything.
Is that true? Would a change of leader actually move the dial?
Well, I can't imagine anybody in his or her right mind wanting to be leader of the Conservative Party.
Well, everybody seems to want to.
I think it's
that's why they go into politics.
Entirely possible that Theresa May will still be Prime Minister in 2029 at this rate. I mean, if in the second series of years and years, perhaps they could put her in as being Prime Minister. Every time I hear intense discussion of her impending departure, I think, OK, another 6 months at least. I don't get the impression that there's anybody who really has the nerve or the desire to get rid of her at the moment.
Right. I mean, it's interesting.
What would you do with it if you got it? What on earth would you do with 10 Downing Street if you got it?
Right, well, we do know that Boris Johnson wants it. We know that Esther McVey wants it. Well, I mean, they want it. They've said so. They've sort of confirmed it. Rory Stewart is another person who said that they would like the top job. Do you agree with Peter that actually this could just keep going? Theresa May could still be in power for a bit longer.
She is a genius at kicking the can down the road, and it's darkly comic that every now and again you'll wait to headlines saying, you know, it's all been agreed, she's going with X, and then you look closely at the small print, and there is no precision at all. And Graham Brady, who likes her a lot, the chair of the 1922 committee, they're old friends and things. I think everyone says, oh, this is brutal. I think he's finding it very hard to be brutal to her. And there is a bit of wriggle room, but only a bit, I think. I mean, when you have the slaughter of the Conservatives, probably a big slaughter in the European elections, when you have 25 candidates already fighting a leadership campaign, and her withdrawal bill probably being defeated whenever it comes back, I think that sequence means we're in the end game. But, I mean, if she was still around in 25 years' time, I wouldn't be wholly surprised.
I'll ask you in 25 years' time. Caroline, the media has emphasised the emotion of the moment. There have been conflicting reports about whether she cried when she was before the 1922 committee or not. I mean, does it matter? Should we talk about this?
No, it doesn't matter. Who cares? You know, this isn't what the future of the country is about, whether or not the PM cries or not. I'm just not really that interested. That's a personal matter for her, and I'm sorry if she cried, as I would be for any human being sad. But what's relevant right now is the fact that we've been stuck in a stalemate for 3 years. There are loads of problems that need sorting out that we're just not getting to, because all we can talk about is Brexit and how no one can agree on it. And, you know, I think everyone's just sick of that.
But that
Why are we talking about crying?
That takes us back to because of David Cameron and because of his dishonest pledge to hold a referendum, which he never intended to hold.
He always said it would resolve the issue, of course.
Well, he said it would, but I think I think he made the pledge in the confident assumption that he would be in another coalition and he wouldn't have to hold it, and it was one of the most irresponsible acts, apart from his attack on Libya, which was also fantastically irresponsible, ever undertaken by any leading politician in the country. It's amazing the man is still even puts his head out into the air and,
all right, well, we know where you
exposes himself. But it's Theresa May. I mean, I have to say, I don't like Theresa May. I don't like her politics. I think everything about her repels me. But I do feel sorry for her at the moment.
You do?
I do. I think personally she's going through an awfully hard time, and I think it's not her fault.
You used to work at Conservative Central Office.
Yeah,
I mean, would you have advised a procedure, if you like? Would you have advised Theresa May to have said more definitely that she was going and when?
I don't think you can make those kind of advisory statements without having all the information, and I don't work there anymore. But I do think that there should be more clarity, and I think that would be helpful, so we aren't all having the same discussion over and over again, saying what if this, what if that, when there's no one really knows, as we've said so many times.
But it's deliberate, isn't it? It's useful for her for there not to be any clarity. You know, this isn't a mistake. This is part of the plan.
Right. The country...
She has a plan?
The country...
Yeah, to not have a plan.
Well, when we talk about Theresa May's tears, the Mirror is saying the country is in tears. Now Boris Johnson has expressed his interest in the top job. Who would you like to see?
I haven't decided yet. At the moment,
Who's
I think...
it between?
Oh, I think it's between, gosh, like you said, like 25 people. I don't think there's a clear front runner. I think pretty much everyone seems to have announced that they would like the top job, but I haven't heard anything about their policies. Haven't heard what they would do. If
I were Boris Johnson, I would worry about the frenzy around him. The frenzy around a candidate nearly always goes on. Do you remember, it's hard to remember, but there was a huge frenzy around Michael Portillo.
Oh,
yeah,
I was just thinking that,
whenever he arrived anywhere, he was doorstepped and he was seen as the great king in waiting, and it all went wrong.
It was the foundation of a great broadcasting career.
And yeah, he's probably much happier.
Worse things have happened.
It's in this very studio, he's probably much happier. But a frenzy, I think, is dangerous for a candidate.
What do you think in terms of who will succeed Theresa May?
Well, it just makes me laugh. People use terms such as big beasts in the jungle. There are no big beasts in the Conservative Party. They're all small, furry animals running around biting each other on the tail. But there is nobody you could describe as big or who offers any sort of inspiration to me whatsoever at all. I think that the Conservative Party ought to have been finished long ago, and the great mistake was not to put it out of its misery in 2010, and we're now suffering from the consequences of having a dead party still walking around, and I don't see any solution to it apart from getting rid of the thing.
Anyone you fancy for the leadership?
Define fancy.
I mean, that you favour, sorry, to use in the broadest term.
You know, I have to admit I haven't taken that much interest in it because I just don't think it's really that relevant, because I don't think it'll move the dial one way or another on the big question that this country is facing. Right. So I don't think it really matters.
Can I just say in 10 seconds about Peter saying it's dead? It's extraordinary. It's about to select a third Prime Minister in a row, having won one small majority since 2010. It has a knack of holding on to power. I mean,
it lost a majority, of course, in 2017.
Yeah, no, exactly, but it's still in power. It didn't win a majority in 2010. It's ruled for 9 years. It's about to elect another Prime Minister, so it isn't dying quite
But
yet.
that's only because of the decrepit state of the other major party.
Well, and on that optimistic note, we're going to move on to something completely different, because the police are trialling facial recognition technology to see if it will help them in the fight against crime. Already in use in supermarkets, concerts and restaurants, campaigners say the technology is a threat to civil liberties and has reliability issues. The BBC's technology programme Click has been investigating its use. Jeff White reports.
The front line in facial recognition. Police cameras in an East London street, everyone gets scanned. If you refuse, here's what can happen.
Don't cover my face, I cover my face. Don't push me over when I'm walking down the street.
This man didn't want to be caught by the police cameras, so he covered his face. Police stopped him, they photographed him anyway, an argument followed.
How would you like it if you walk down the street and someone grabs you? Hold yourself down, you go over. That's you. You would like it, would you? You mind your neck in.
What's your suspicion?
The fact that he's walked past clearly marked
I would do the
facial
same.
recognition thing and covered his face.
I would do the
It
same.
gives us grounds to stop
No,
him
it doesn't.
and
The police said this was disorderly behaviour, so they gave him a fine.
The chap told me down the road, he said he got facial recognition. So I walked past like that. It's a cold day as well. As I've done that, the police officers asked me to come to him, so I've got me back up. I said to him, basically, I said, I don't want my face shown on anything. If I want to cover my face, I'll cover my face. It's not for them to tell me not to cover my face. Yeah. I've got a now £90 fine. There you go. Look at that. Thanks, lads. £90. Well done.
He was caught up in the last of 10 trials carried out by the Metropolitan Police. The Met have had successes. There were 3 arrests from facial recognition on this test day alone, but the trials have proved controversial. Opponents claim they're taking place in a legal vacuum.
There is nothing in UK law that has the words facial recognition. There is no legal basis for the police to be using facial recognition. There are no legal limitations on how they can use it, no policy, no regulation. This is a free-for-all.
The police argue that, in a time when every smartphone camera has facial recognition, why should they be left behind?
I believe, as does the Commissioner and the Management Board and the Met, believe not trialling such technology would be neglectful. Actually, we ought to explore all technology to see how it can keep people safer, how it can make policing more effective. However, we are completely aware of some of the concerns that are raised, and what we're doing with these trials is actually trying to understand those better so we can actually protect human rights but also keep people safe at the same time.
That was Ivan Balhatchett at the end of the film from the Metropolitan Police. I'd like to welcome in the studio technology expert Stephanie Hare, welcome, and also Tony Porter. We can speak to him via webcam. He is the UK Surveillance Camera Commissioner. His role is to work with the Home Office to regulate the use of video surveillance. Welcome to you. Before I talk to you, Tony, Stephanie, first of all, tell us a bit more about how this technology works.
This technology is just going to be scanning people in real time on the street. And what's really interesting about it is you don't need to know that it's there for it to be working. So no consent is one thing, but no knowledge is another. And that's what makes it so powerful. You start to change your behavior when you're being surveyed. You also start to change your behavior when you think you might be being surveyed.
Is this something that the authorities should be doing? Is it right to use the technology in this way, or are they overreaching?
They shouldn't be doing it without it being something that we've discussed in Parliament and legislated, precisely because it's so powerful, but also because it's so inaccurate. It penalises women because it misidentifies women much more than it does men, so that's over 50% of the population. And it really is terrible. It underperforms terribly with people of colour who are already over-policed. You can't have a technology like that that's disserving over half the population in this way. And really, it's not great for the police either, because we need to give them the best tools that they can have to do their job. And we also want to make sure that the police have excellent relations with the community. This is the opposite of that.
Tony, can you defend the use of the technology?
Use of the technology. I think the police are in an invidious position. On the one hand, people are saying you need to protect us. But on the other, civil liberties are saying no, you shouldn't. So what I would take issue with some of the comments from the clip, there is legislation and there is law that does legislate for the use of facial recognition. So the Code of Practice I oversee, 12 guiding principles, talks about advancing technology being regulated now and in the future by the Code of Practice. It's also legislated by the Protection Act, which now, since 2018, covers the processing of sensitive biometric data, and it is also covered by such things as common law. The problem is, it is complex and it is confusing, and it is, because of that, difficult for the public to understand issues.
Right. The sound is a little bit unstable, but we will stick with it, Tony, because I think everybody can hear you perfectly well. Peter Hitchens, do you think this technology should be used by the police if it can identify and assist the police in tracking down known offenders? No,
every fibre of my being revolts against it. It reminds me of the People's Republic of China. It improperly reverses the relationship between the state and the individual. The state should be the one identifying itself to us, not us to the state. And what appeared to be in that clip, which I've actually seen a longer version of, what appeared to be the arrogance of the police towards the man who declined to take part in the little experiment, is an example of the sort of thing which will happen more and more if we allow them to do this. The police have a simple job, and it's to prevent crime. They could achieve it very easily without technology by doing what they ought to do, which is patrolling on foot. They don't need all this stuff, and they certainly don't need to boss us around in this horrible Chinese way.
Right. Well, Tony, what do you say in response?
I've got some sympathy. I understand where Peter's coming from, but the challenge coming backwards is that phrase: "You want an analog police force in a digital age." How are the police to respond, for example, to the criticisms levelled by Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary back in 2016 that they weren't using and exploring technology? And additionally, I would say that this is a trial. And how are the police going to understand, and how is society going to understand, if this can be used to help and protect them? Finally, the issue about the disorder, I think, is completely different. OK, the facial recognition triggered the response, but actually that was dealt with through the Public Order Act, not actually the technology.
So, Caroline, there's a legal basis for this, says Tony.
It's a ridiculous argument. You know, talking about digital policing, analogue policing in a digital age, you know, walking down the street isn't digital, it's analogue. We don't need to be digitally surveilling people. We're not a police state. We shouldn't be, as we're walking around, having our faces digitally surveyed. It's just a nonsense argument. When people are talking about the need for digital solutions, it's because people are committing crime on the internet, not because they're walking around London.
Right, Emma, would it make you feel safer?
Not at this stage. But I do think we should look into all forms of technology that we can put on our streets to make us safer. But from that clip, which obviously a very distressing clip, I also saw the longer version. It's clearly not ready, and I certainly think we need to look more closely at how people who oppose that kind of surveillance are treated, especially if they're covering their faces.
But how can we ever justify just blanket surveillance? I mean, this is...
If you've got nothing to hide, people will say, if you've got nothing to hide, what's the problem?
Well, I've got nothing to hide. I still don't want the police scanning my face. It's just an outrageous invasion of my privacy and of my rights to not have my face watched by the state.
I've got lots to hide, and so have you. If the police went into all your
you talk for yourself.
all your personal details, if the police said, can we see your bank accounts, can we see your health records, you say, no, I'm entitled to hide it. We've all got lots to hide.
I've also got lots to hide, and I'm wholly relaxed about this. I mean, I just think we don't live in a police state, and there is no tendency towards one. And if technology is around that helps them track down those with even more to hide than any of us on this panel, I'm not paranoid about their use of it. It's like patient records, which actually, people say, oh, this is terrible, Big Brother and all the rest of it. It's actually very useful for those to be shared.
That's so
and
different, though. They're anonymised and they're about, improving health and getting better data.
State. If we lived in a police state, we should all be alarmed. We don't. They're far too busy to bother about our things that we've got to hide.
Steve, how do you think police states come about? They don't come about by a sudden descent of the shutters. They come about by a steady slicing away of the freedoms which we have.
This is one of those. Not come about through an experimental use of technology.
That's been going on for 3 years. Don't talk over just because the viewers can't understand. But what does it come down as quickly as in the way that Peter has described a police state?
What, a descent to a police state?
Yeah.
No. The use of an experimental technological device does not then lead to a police state or even move incrementally towards it. The origins of police states are much, much deeper than the police saying we should have the same technology that everyone else has access to.
Aren't the police just utilising technology that is there and could help them, Stephanie?
Well, I mean, you have to sort of ask, at what point do we stop? Do we want everyone to give over their DNA? Do we want to have their face, their voice, their fingerprints? Because we could live in a 100% secure society. The police could just walk into your home or your business, search your devices, search your car. We live in a liberal democracy. We have had centuries, traditions in law that require agents of the state to get a warrant to do those types of searches. And what we all need to understand around this table is that scanning someone's face is not about their face. It's about identifying them so that they can be linked to all other data about them.
Right. Well, Tony, there seems to have been a chilling effect here, and if you watch that part of the film, despite the case that you and Steve have put, of people feeling that these are steps towards a police state.
Yeah, what I would ask is that you have to remember that the police have trialled 10 events where they've used this technology. They've brought in civil liberty groups, lawyers, they've released the press, they've publicised its use, and they're now exposing themselves to the outcome and the product of its use. To raise the notion it's a police state is frankly ridiculous. Whether or not Whether or not it's legitimate to use this technology in the long run is a completely different matter. And I think there are judicial processes that will consider that issue going forward. But I think if you compare it to China, where there's 176 million cameras, I hear that facial recognition is of every street and every corner. That isn't the direction we're heading. But we do need stronger and more robust regulation to ensure if the technology is any use, it can be used to our benefit going forward.
Is that reassuring?
No. We have many millions of cameras in this country already surveilling us. And to be called alarmist and paranoid for pointing out that this is a very considerable increase in the power of the state over the individual seems to me to be a mistaken way of approaching the debate. Also, are these things going to be in use? Is there going to be any legislation about it? Or will it just happen, as so many things the police do, just happen, and we find that we've fallen into this without anybody ever being asked, as so often is?
That's exactly what bothers me. When I looked at the list of, places that they've done these trials, I was there. So quite possibly I hadn't consented to it. I had no idea about it. The first I heard about it was yesterday when this clip got released. I don't remember anyone discussing this in Parliament. I don't remember any legislation. I don't remember public debates. And suddenly I discovered I have had my face.
Would legislation help? If there was clear legislation, I mean, Tony says there's a legal basis, but if there was legislation around this, would that make it easier for you?
I'm always going to be against it. However, I would feel better if there was an actual public debate and we brought all these issues out in the open. And I actually believe we would end up not legislating for it because it's so clearly such a big mistake.
Tony, do you think there should be legislation? Would that make your job easier in that sense to sell this sort of technology being trialled?
Yeah, for the last couple of years, I have called for a stronger regulatory and legislative base that provides clarity. I've called that if it is to be introduced, it should mirror or at least be akin to that where the more secret surveillance is used, because overt surveillance, which is this, is now arguably more invasive. So I've made those arguments for 2 years. In relation to a public debate, next month on the 20th of June, we're holding a National Surveillance Camera Day. I'm engaged with politicians to seek to get this issue raised in the House. And I have also had a question time and other events where we invite the public to tell us how they feel about this and actually get these comments on air. I think it's extremely important.
Well, will any of you be going along to that?
It sounds like a real treat,
What,
doesn't
is
it?
it
National
like a rally
surveillance.
There'll be parties in the streets.
There'll be parties in the streets.
How can I go?
All right,
But
well,
regulation is the key. It does not have to be sinister. And quite a lot of things happen where we're not directly consulted, from, I don't know, parking restrictions to whatever. And it is not always done for sinister reasons. In fact,
this is not
very
parking
rarely so.
restriction.
we're going to have to end it there, but Stephanie, thank you very much for coming in, and good to talk to you too, Tony. We're going to start to discuss the European elections, which are happening next week. We're going to welcome in Lawrence Webb, who's standing for UKIP. I'm going to talk to Lawrence for a few moments in a minute. Now, we've been speaking to all of the other parties, some of them this week, more of them next week, the Green Party, the Brexit Party, the Liberal Democrats and Change UK. But first of all, Lawrence is here with us. Now, the Brexit Party has one policy in these elections, to leave the EU now without a deal. UKIP has exactly the same single Brexit policy. Why would voters choose to vote for UKIP rather than the Brexit Party?
Well, you're wrong. UKIP is the only party that has had a clear plan on how we leave the European Union. It's a plan written by Joe Batten some time ago. He's been on this for a very, very long time. None of the other parties, including the Brexit Party, actually have any structure of how they're going to leave, and we can see the mess.
But on the question of leaving without a deal, why would they pick you rather than the Brexit Party?
We've been doing this for over 25 years. There would have been no referendum without UKIP. It's fair to say that we wouldn't have won that referendum without UKIP activists on the ground fighting for it. A few Tories came and helped as well, and Labour Leave and a few others. But we've got a clear policy on how we leave. All our policies, we've always had a full range of policies in our manifesto, are all for a post-European Britain. We're the only party that is prepared for life outside the EU.
So you want a free trade deal with the EU?
Yes, I mean, they'd be mad not to give us one, but if not, then we will revert to WTO rules.
And do you accept the predictions that leaving the EU on World Trade Organisation terms would reduce the UK's trade with the EU by 40% over 10 years, resulting in a fall in income per head of population of 2.6%?
No.
Why not?
Short answer, because the EU would be foolish not to move to a free trade agreement with us, because if you look at the cars people
But I'm asking
drive...
you about the figures, because these are the figures that have been put forward by the Centre for Economic Performance, and that's the estimate, along with the Bank of England, in terms of certainly a short to medium-term hit to the economy.
The Bank of England have got things wrong in the past, and I strongly suspect they've got it wrong in this instance as well.
What do you think the impact will be on the economy of leaving without a deal and on WTO terms?
There's no doubt that in the short term there may be a little bit of a blip, but actually...
What does that mean? What does a little bit of a blip mean?
Well, things will have to be ironed out and resolved, but actually I think if we were moving towards a situation where we were leaving under WTO terms... then the European Union will get its act together very, very quickly and actually offer us a free trade deal.
But you're talking in generalisations of they would get their act together very, very quickly. There would be a short-term blip for voters. Do you think you should be honest about that in your manifesto and on your website?
But what the government is doing is guesswork as well. It's the best estimate in our opinion.
That sort of whataboutery isn't really a defence, is it, to say that they are doing it even worse than we are? May not be that reassuring for voters.
Well, perhaps not. But as I say, UKIP has a clear plan of how we leave. We would offer them a free trade deal, and I think they would accept it. Certainly the German car manufacturers would force Merkel into agreeing a free trade deal.
Well, that's been said before, but actually that hasn't proven to be the case, has it, in these negotiations?
No, because if you look at what is going on behind the scenes, they do not believe that we are going to leave.
Right.
So it's not in their interest to offer us a nice, easy way out.
All right. Your old boss, Nigel Farage, is back on the political scene and his party is leading the polls. Do you regret that your party's association with Stephen Yaxley-Lennon drove him out, as he would say?
I think Nigel drifted off fairly immediately after the referendum, long before Stephen Yaxley-Lennon or
although he cites that association as part of the reason for leaving.
He may well do, but the facts are that he pretty much walked away in 2016 after the referendum.
Right. I mean, he's leading the polls, as you know, and obviously polls come with a health warning, drawing big crowds to his events. You could have had all that if he was still the leader.
He could have come back at any point. Nigel chose not to. As I'm sure you'll mention at some point, we've had several leaders over the last couple of years. At any point, Nigel could have come back and led the team if he wanted to. He didn't want to.
Right. Do you want to see Gerard Batten staying on as leader? He always said he would be an interim leader, but presumably he could stand.
Yes, because he has stabilised the party. We were very much on our knees when he took over. Membership was down. He's almost doubled that membership in the time that he's been leader.
But the other figures
the finances back on track.
Yeah, but if you look at the other figures, I mean, he has appointed Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley as an advisor, which did contribute to Nigel Farage, Paul Nuttall and a host of other MEPs out of the party. You've collapsed in the polls from 27% in the last European elections to just 3% now, and you lost 145 councillors in last week's local elections. So in what way has Gerard Batten been a success?
Well, we put up more candidates than we'd done previously. A lot of the seats where we lost councillors, we didn't actually fight this time because the party was going through a process of reorganisation. There were some 8,000 seats up, and we stood, I think, in about 1,400 of them.
Right.
And if you look at the seats that we stood, we averaged about 28% of the vote, so not as terrible as you'd make out.
Is UKIP a busted flush?
Oh, I think so. I hope so, because of the Yaxley-Lennon Association, which ought to make it so. Or maybe it's just a bit of a blip, as you would call it.
What do you say?
All parties ebb and flow. I think the Tories are on a downward spiral at the moment.
Or maybe blips are bigger than they look when you...
But we'll bounce back.
All right, Lawrence Webb, thank you very much. We're going to move on because as Caroline is here as our guest, we have her book, Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias. It was worth coming on for, you see. Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. We can show the book cover there to our viewers. Yes, they are. What prompted you to write the book?
Well, I mean, the sort of immediate prompt was discovering that in medicine there was this huge gender data gap, that the vast majority of knowledge that we have is based on the male body. And so as a result, women get more side effects, less effective treatment. Women are more likely to die following a heart attack because the symptoms don't conform to male symptoms. The diagnostic tests have been developed around the male body, and so women are going undiagnosed. And of course, that's just one section of the book. It's also, you know, car crash test dummies are designed around the male body. transport infrastructure is designed around typical male lifestyle patterns. So it's a mixture of sex and gender, that women's bodies are not being taken into account, but also the way women live their lives is not being taken into account.
Peter?
Well, the heart attack thing is devastating, it seems to me, and you have obviously a strong point there. When you mention car crash dummies, the thought does flash into my mind that probably far more men crash cars than women. But obviously
they do, but women are much more likely to die if they're in a car crash. They're 47% more likely to die, and 17% more likely to die, and 47% more likely to be seriously injured. And we're talking life-changing injuries.
It's obviously worth considering, isn't it? I can't see that it isn't a good idea to put these things right.
I mean, basically, women are 50%. Thanks very much. You should buy it.
But do you think you've uncovered a conspiracy here? I mean, what struck me was, do you think there's been some sort of deliberate campaign to, as you say, miss women out of the sort of data that exists? Or do you think it's just unthinking?
No, I mean, I make very clear in the book, absolutely, it's not a conspiracy. I don't for one second believe that cardiologists want women to die or car manufacturers want women to die. It's just because we are so used to and have historically, this is something you can track all the way back through history, through literature, through science, through medicine, using the average male body and the average male as the average human. And that's how we've got into this mess, is that we're used to thinking of women as atypical, as a minority.
Is this a world you recognise, the world that's described data-wise by Caroline?
Yeah, I do, actually. I agree, especially, though, about it's not a conspiracy. It's come from hundreds of years of men being in the positions where they're making these decisions. And I think what we need to do, as well as exposing it, which I think is brilliant, is we need to get more women into these kind of roles and have more female voices at the table, and therefore open up this discussion.
Right. No, I agree, because, I mean, one example I think is so telling is, that thing everyone always finds very funny, that Apple, when they produced their comprehensive health tracker app, they forgot to include a menstrual tracker. Now, I just don't believe that if that had been a group with enough women in it, that would have happened.
100%.
Because Apple doesn't want to create a product that doesn't serve women as well as men. They want women to buy their product.
Right.
But they just, there were too many men, and they don't have periods, and so it didn't occur to them.
So it is actually about data also recognising the differences, rather than it having been designed solely for men, and it's not about sort of gender-blind data in that case. It would be more useful, Steve, presumably, to have data that is more sensitive to a different lived experience.
Oh, completely. It's really, we've discussed 2 books on today's programme. Even though I'm going to read it, the David Cameron one, I'll learn nothing, I'm 100% sure.
But you're still going to read it.
I'm still going to read it. But this, I had no idea that there was such an inadvertent bias in this way.
Good, serious, practical feminism of the best kind.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting.
But it's interesting that statistics... I mean, will people listen to statistics in the way that it's been presented, do you think, Caroline? Because sometimes people just stop listening when they hear statistic after statistic and so on.
Well, I mean, it's not just statistics, though, is it? It's the result of not having this data. It's the result that women are more likely to die if they're in a car crash. It's the result that women are more likely to die if they have a heart attack. It's the result that women have far more adverse side effects, that drugs are much less likely to work for women. All these things which lead, on a wide gamut from, women being inconvenienced all the way to women dying. And I think people do care about that. Of course people care that women are dying.
Right, but I mean, we have something called gender impact assessments when it comes to the sort of provision of services. Do you think this is the sort of information that will help drive sort of policy outcomes and services?
Well, it ought to, but it seems to me that an awful lot of the impact assessments which are being made are of a different sort, of a political sort. And this is, say, serious, practical, realistic stuff of the kind that we ought to be paying attention to, and therefore much more worth listening to than so much of the sociological pseudo-babble that we get instead.
Right, is that what happens? I mean, is there a risk of political hijacking here of these sorts of statistics and data?
I think that's why it's so good that it is based on statistics. I don't necessarily agree with you about political hijacking, but I do think that when you have clear statistics like this, it's so much easier to make the argument, and it's really difficult for people to ignore it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't see why there will be... I don't see what form the political hijacking could take. I
didn't think I said there would be any political...
No, I think
but
you said the...
No, he was looking at me when he said it.
Response, there's clearly a need to respond to that. Was it widely known and you've just compiled it, or have you discovered new things? I didn't know about
Well, I mean, obviously it's based on research done by experts, and I've spoken to experts.
Yeah.
So, I haven't gone and done the studies myself.
No, but you've pulled it all together.
I've pulled it all together. And the thing that really shocked me and that drove me to writing the book is that, yes, there are people in their fields who know that this is going on, but the wider public does not know. I am a feminist who is an active feminist, and I discovered the heart attacks issue in 2014. I just thought, how do I not know this? Why isn't everyone talking about this? This is absolutely shocking.
Do you think people will talk about it now, Peter? Do you think?
Oh, I think they will, and I hope they will. I wish you the very best of luck with the book. Luckily, you're running to some extent with the tide.
All right.
Write books like mine, no one reads them at all.
Oh, well, from all that, bye-bye.